John Miller had lived alone for nearly a decade on his desert ranch. The land was vast and empty, stretching for miles in every direction with nothing but sand, dry brush, and a few scattered mesquite trees. After losing his wife and daughter in a car accident, John had chosen the desert as his home, not out of love for the wilderness, but because he wanted to be far away from people, far away from memories that could break his heart again. Each day followed the same rhythm. He would wake before sunrise, sip a cup of strong black coffee, and walk to the barn to check on his cattle. The animals were simple to care for. They ate, they drank, they grew. But unlike people, they did not ask questions or demand anything more than the basics. John liked that. The quiet life gave him a sense of control he could not find anywhere else. He spent hours repairing fences, fixing broken gates, and making sure the water troughs were full. The desert was harsh, unforgiving, and mistakes could be costly. A broken fence could mean lost cattle, and running out of water could mean the death of the livestock. Yet John found comfort in the work. Every nail he hammered, every gate he secured reminded him that he was still capable of caring, still capable of protecting something. The nights were long and lonely. The desert was quiet except for the occasional howl of a coyote or the rustle of sand under the feet of unseen animals. Stars filled the sky in a way John had never seen anywhere else. The Milky Way stretched like a silver ribbon above his small weathered house. On some nights he would sit on the porch staring at the stars, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and peace. The desert was empty, yes, but it was honest. It did not lie, it did not cheat, and it did not hurt. One particularly hot afternoon, John mounted his old horse, Dusty, to inspect the northern fence line. The sun burned down and the air shimmered with heat waves that made the desert look like it was alive. As he rode, he scanned the horizon for any signs of trouble. That's when he noticed it. A glimmer in the distance that did not belong to the usual desert landscape. At first, John thought it was the sun reflecting off a rock or maybe a trick of the heat. He slowed Dusty and squinted, trying to make out the shape. As he got closer, he realized it was not a rock at all. Something or someone was hanging from one of the lone mesquite trees that dotted the desert floor. The figure was small, suspended in midair by a thin rope tied high on the branch. John's heart pounded. He had never seen anything like this before. Who could be out here? He muttered under his breath. The desert was too vast, too harsh for someone to survive alone. And yet there she was. A young girl dangling above the sand, her arms weakly moving as if she were trying to hold herself up. Carefully, John dismounted and tied Dusty to a nearby bush. He approached slowly, calling out softly, Hey there. Are you okay?" His voice sounded strange in the emptiness, almost swallowed by the heat waves rising from the sand. The girl did not respond. She seemed too weak to even acknowledge him. Her hair was matted and dusty, her skin sunburned. The rope dug into her wrists, leaving angry red marks. Fear and worry surged in John's chest. He had faced wild animals, storms, and heat waves in the desert, but this was something entirely different. John quickly assessed the situation. The rope looked old, frayed in some places, but it could still hold her weight for a little longer. He knew he had to act carefully. One wrong move and she could fall, or worse, the rope could tighten further. With a calmness that surprised even him, John found a sharp knife in his belt and began cutting the rope, working slowly and steadily. When the rope finally gave way, the girl collapsed into John's arms. She was lighter than he expected, almost fragile, but she clung to him weakly as if holding on to life itself. "It's okay, you're safe now," John whispered, supporting her as he carried her back toward his ranch house. She murmured something incoherent, her lips dry and cracked, but John didn't press. Words were not important right now. Survival was. Back at the house, John gently placed her on a couch and fetched a glass of water. She drank greedily, coughing a few times but clearly gaining some strength. John noticed the fear in her wide, dark eyes. She was alert now, scanning the room as if she expected danger at every corner. "I'm John," he said softly. "What's your name?" The girl hesitated, then whispered, "Lila." Her voice was small, almost a whisper, but it carried a weight that made John's chest tighten. Lila. Such a fragile name for someone who had clearly endured so much. John wrapped her in a soft blanket. The desert sun had burned her and the night would be cold. She shivered slightly and John realized how lucky she had been. Alone in the desert, her chances of surviving another hour were slim. Yet here she was, alive because fate, or maybe luck, had led her to his ranch. As the evening fell, John sat near Lila, keeping a watchful eye on her. She rested quietly now, her breathing slow and uneven. John reflected on the strange twist of life that had brought this girl into his world. For years he had lived alone, avoiding people, hiding from memories, and keeping pain at bay. And now, in a single moment, life had returned to his ranch in the form of a small, scared girl. The desert outside darkened, and the stars began to appear, just as they had every night for the past 10 years. Only tonight John noticed them differently. They no longer felt like symbols of loneliness or emptiness. They were witnesses to something new, hope. He did not know what the future would hold, or why Lila had ended up in the desert. But for the first time in years, John felt something he had almost forgotten, a sense of purpose, a responsibility that went beyond himself. He stayed awake that night, sitting beside her, listening to the faint sounds of the desert. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Dusty shifted in his stall, and Lila slept quietly, unaware that she had changed John's life forever. The desert was still vast, still harsh, but now it was also alive with possibility. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, casting long shadows across John's ranch. Lila stirred on the couch, her small body wrapped in a thick blanket. Her eyes opened cautiously, blinking at the light that poured through the window. She looked around the room, noticing the simple furniture, the worn wooden floors, and the quiet presence of John, who sat nearby drinking his morning coffee. John watched her with a mixture of concern and relief. She had slept almost through the night, which was a good sign, but he knew that surviving the desert and the trauma she had endured would take more than one night. "Good morning," he said gently, trying not to startle her. "You slept well?" Lila nodded slightly but did not speak. Her throat was dry and her voice felt weak. John brought her a small cup of water and encouraged her to sip slowly. She took tiny sips at first, then drank more confidently as the liquid revived her. He gave her a simple breakfast, some bread, cheese, and fruit. Food he had prepared carefully to avoid upsetting her fragile stomach. "Do you remember what happened?" John asked quietly, careful not to push her too hard. Lila's eyes widened and she shook her head. The memories were too fresh, too painful. John understood. She needed time. He sat beside her, keeping the silence, letting her feel safe without forcing answers. Over the next few hours, John helped her wash off the dust and sand that clung to her skin. He found some old clothes in a small chest and handed her a soft shirt and pants. They were slightly big, but they would keep her comfortable. As she dressed, she looked at him hesitantly, as if unsure whether to trust this stranger completely. John smiled warmly. "It's okay," he said. "You're safe now. You don't need to be afraid." Lila finally whispered a few words, her voice shaky. "Why, me?" John felt a pang in his chest. Why her indeed? He didn't know the answer, but he also knew that the question was not important right now. What mattered was her survival. "I don't know," he replied softly. "But you're safe here, and I'll make sure no one hurts you again." The rest of the morning passed slowly. John showed Lila the ranch, small at first, just the barn, the water troughs, and the chickens. She watched the animals with fascination, her fear slowly melting into curiosity. John explained simple tasks, like filling water buckets and feeding the chickens. Lila listened quietly, absorbing everything, her eyes shining with a mixture of wonder and gratitude. By midday, John decided it was time to check on the desert where he had found her. He wanted to make sure no one was nearby, no one who might be looking for her. He asked Lila to stay in the house while he rode out with Dusty. She protested softly, wanting to come along, but John insisted. "It's too dangerous," he explained. "You need to rest. I'll make sure everything is okay." The desert was as harsh and endless as it had been the day before. John rode slowly, scanning the horizon for signs of trouble. As he approached the tree where Lila had been found, he noticed footprints in the sand leading away. They were faint but unmistakable, Someone had been there recently. A shiver ran down his spine. Whoever had left her there might return. John returned to the ranch before sunset, bringing news of the tracks. Lila listened intently, her small hands gripping the blanket she still held around her shoulders. Fear returned to her eyes, but this time it was mixed with trust. She knew John would protect her. "Will they come back?" she asked softly. John shook his head. "We'll make sure they don't. You're not alone anymore." Over the next few days, John focused on rebuilding Lila's strength. He gave her water regularly, cooked simple meals, and let her rest. He noticed small changes. She laughed quietly when Dusty nuzzled her hand. She began asking questions about the desert and the animals, and she even started helping with chores around the ranch. Lila's curiosity grew quickly. She asked about the stars, the desert plants, and the animals that roamed the land at night. John answered patiently, enjoying her presence more than he expected. For years he had avoided people, avoiding connection to keep himself from feeling pain. But with Lila he found a strange comfort. She reminded him of his daughter, of what he had lost, and of the life he once had. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple, Lila and John sat on the porch. Lila clutched a small blanket around her shoulders, and John poured them both a cup of warm tea. Silence settled between them, comfortable and unbroken. "John," Lila began hesitantly. I was scared." John nodded. "I know," he said softly. "You were very brave. You survived out there all by yourself." Lila looked down at her hands. "But I didn't know if anyone would come." John reached out, placing a reassuring hand over hers. "I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." As the night grew darker, the desert seemed less empty. The stars twinkled above, and the wind whispered gently through the mesquite trees. Lila fell asleep in the chair beside him, exhausted but safe. John watched over her, feeling a deep sense of responsibility. He realized that saving her had changed him as much as it had saved her. Days turned into weeks, and Lila's health improved steadily. Her voice grew stronger, and she began speaking more clearly. She told John fragments of her story, how she had been traveling with someone she thought she could trust, how she had been left behind, and how she had managed to survive until he found her. The details were sparse, but John understood enough. She had been in danger, and he had saved her life. With each passing day, their bond grew. John began to feel something he had long forgotten: hope. Lila reminded him that life could still bring unexpected surprises, and that even in the harshest places, kindness and courage could make a difference. One morning, as John checked the fences, he paused to look at the horizon. Lila was outside, helping with the small animals, her laughter carrying through the air. For the first time in years, he did not feel the crushing weight of solitude. The desert was still vast and unforgiving, but now it held something precious, a chance for connection, for trust, and for life to continue. John knew the road ahead would not be easy. Questions about Lila's past, the people who had abandoned her and her future safety, would require careful thought and action. But for now, he allowed himself to simply watch her, to let her presence remind him that even after years of solitude, life could still surprise him in ways he never imagined. And in that quiet desert ranch, a fragile but growing bond began to take root. Between the lonely rancher and the girl who had appeared as if by fate, changing both of their lives forever. The desert had a way of testing both patience and courage. Days passed slowly on John's ranch, but the sense of calm was deceptive. John knew that finding Lila had been a stroke of luck, and he also understood that whoever had left her in the desert might return. Every sound carried a warning: coyotes howling in the distance, the wind rattling the wooden fences, or the occasional rustle of sand as small creatures moved through the brush. John remained alert, determined to protect the girl who had become the center of his life. Lila had started to regain her strength. Each morning she would help feed the chickens, collect water, and even brush Dusty, the old horse who had become her quiet companion. Though she still spoke sparingly, she was learning quickly, absorbing John's instructions with a careful attentiveness. Her curiosity about the desert grew daily. She asked questions about the plants that survived the heat, the animals that roamed at night, and the stars that glittered above. John answered patiently, sharing what he knew about the harsh environment that he had called home for years. One afternoon, as the sun blazed overhead, John decided it was time to investigate further. He mounted Dusty and rode toward the area where he had found Lila. The desert stretched endlessly, the sand hot beneath his boots, shimmering in the heat. When he reached the mesquite tree, he noticed something new, more footprints leading away from the site. These tracks were fresh, and the pattern suggested someone had passed through recently. John's chest tightened. Whoever had abandoned Lila in the desert might be nearby, and the threat was real. Returning to the ranch, John called a local ranger on a secure line. He explained the situation carefully, leaving out no detail. The ranger promised to send a team to investigate, but in such a vast and remote area, help could take hours or even days to arrive. John understood this. He would have to rely on his own knowledge of the land to keep Lila safe. That evening, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, John sat on the porch with Lila. She had been quieter than usual, staring at the horizon with wide, thoughtful eyes. "Are they coming back?" she asked softly. Her voice filled with both fear and hope. John shook his head. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I will make sure they don't find you. You're safe here with me." Lila nodded slowly, but her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the blanket around her shoulders. John realized that while her body had recovered, her mind was still processing the trauma. He needed to give her time, and he needed to teach her how to feel safe again. Over the next few days, he began to train her in small ways: how to stay alert in the desert, how to recognize unusual sounds, and how to move quietly when necessary. It was not harsh or frightening training. It was preparation, a way to give her confidence and self-reliance. Despite the dangers that surrounded them, moments of peace began to emerge. Lila laughed softly when Dusty nuzzled her hand, or when a small lizard darted across the sand. She started asking more questions about John's past, about why he lived alone in the desert, and about the animals and plants that survived in such a harsh place. John shared pieces of his story carefully, allowing her to understand him without overwhelming her. They began to form a bond that went beyond the ordinary. Lila had become not only his responsibility, but also his companion. One afternoon, while exploring the edge of the property near the distant dunes, John noticed signs of human presence that unsettled him. Pieces of torn fabric caught in a bush, footprints leading away from the area, and a discarded water bottle suggested that someone had passed through recently. His heart pounded as he considered the possibility that Lila's pursuers might still be active. He rode back to the ranch quickly, determined to prepare for any potential threat. At the ranch, John took steps to fortify their surroundings. He repaired fences, reinforced the barn doors, and created safe spaces where Lila could hide if necessary. He also began keeping watch at night, sitting on the porch with a rifle nearby, listening to every rustle of the desert and every distant sound. Lila stayed close, trusting his instincts and learning from his caution. She was beginning to understand that survival in the desert was not just about strength. It was about awareness, patience, and careful decision-making. One evening, as a soft wind swept across the desert, John and Lila sat outside the house watching the stars. Lila's voice broke the comfortable silence. "John, why did you help me?" she asked, her eyes reflecting the light of the stars. John looked at her thoughtfully. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said simply. "No one should be left alone in a place like this, especially not you." Lila smiled faintly, and for the first time, John saw a small spark of peace in her eyes. The following days brought more understanding of Lila's past. She revealed fragments of her story, how she had been traveling with someone who promised to take care of her, but how she had been left behind when they decided she was too much trouble. She spoke cautiously in broken sentences, avoiding certain details that clearly caused her pain. John listened without judgment, offering comfort and reassurance. Every word she shared, every small detail of her ordeal, made him more determined to keep her safe. John also realized that the desert itself held lessons. He taught Lila how to read the wind, how to identify animal tracks, and how to find water sources hidden among rocks and brush. She absorbed these lessons quickly, her confidence growing with each passing day. The desert, which had once seemed hostile and lifeless, began to feel like a teacher, a harsh but honest guide. One morning, John noticed unusual movement near the far fence line. Small footprints, partially covered by sand, suggested someone had been there recently. His heart raced. He could not yet identify who had come, but he knew that Lila's past had not been fully left behind. Danger was still a possibility. John spoke to Lila calmly but firmly. "You need to stay close today," he said. "We may have company, and I want to make sure you're ready." Lila nodded, her eyes serious but trusting. As the sun set, painting the desert in gold and red, John felt a strange mixture of pride and worry. Lila was growing stronger, learning to trust and finding her place in a world that had once seemed so cruel. But the shadow of her past lingered, a reminder that survival required more than courage. It required vigilance, preparation, and sometimes the willingness to confront dangers that lurked unseen. That night, John kept watch once again, sitting beside the window listening to the wind and thinking about the future. He knew that their time in the desert together was only beginning, and that challenges would come. But he also knew one thing clearly. Lila's presence had given him a renewed sense of purpose. He would do whatever it took to protect her, guide her, and help her heal. And as the stars shone brightly above, the desert seemed a little less empty. It was no longer just a place of solitude. It had become a place of connection, learning, and the first fragile steps toward hope. The desert was quiet that night, but John knew better than to trust the stillness. The wind whispered softly through the mesquite trees, carrying the scent of sand and distant brush fires. Inside the ranch house, Lila was asleep on the couch, wrapped tightly in a blanket. John sat near the window, a rifle resting against the wall, listening intently for any unusual sound. For days, John had noticed faint signs that someone had been moving near the ranch: the tracks in the sand, the pieces of torn fabric, and the small disturbances near the water troughs. Now he felt certain that whoever had left Lila in the desert might be returning. He could not allow that to happen. His mind raced with scenarios, each more urgent than the last. The safety of the girl depended entirely on him. Suddenly, a soft rustle came from outside. John froze. The sound was faint but deliberate, too steady to be a desert animal. His heart pounded. He motioned for Lila to stay down and quietly whispered, "Stay here. Don't make a sound." Lila obeyed, her small hands gripping the blanket as she watched him move toward the door. John stepped outside, the cold night air brushing against his face. The desert stretched endlessly, the moon casting long shadows across the sand. He could see the faint outlines of figures moving near the fence line. They were cautious, but he could sense their intent. They were looking for someone. His jaw tightened. Lila. They were looking for Lila. Carefully, John positioned himself behind a large rock, keeping the rifle ready. He observed the figures, 3 adults moving slowly and quietly, their eyes scanning the ranch. They carried small bags, likely containing supplies for whoever they were searching for. John knew that confrontation might be inevitable, but he also knew the desert better than anyone. He could use the terrain, the shadows, and the fences to his advantage. Meanwhile, Lila stayed silent, watching from the window. She had learned from John in the past days how to be patient, how to stay hidden, how to trust the instincts of someone who knew the land. She clutched the blanket tightly, trying to steady her own fear. She understood that John's courage was now her shield. The figures moved closer to the house, unaware that someone was watching them. John's mind raced. He needed to protect Lila without revealing his position too soon. Slowly, he crept along the side of the house, keeping low, moving from shadow to shadow. Every step was deliberate, every breath controlled. He reached a position where he could observe the intruders without being seen. One of them paused, kneeling near the fence to inspect the ground. John recognized the danger. If they found tracks leading to the house, they would know she was there. He waited patiently, watching as they argued quietly among themselves. Their voices were low, tense, filled with frustration. John realized they were not expecting resistance. They thought the girl would be easy to find and take. A plan formed in John's mind. He could not let them get to her, not after everything. Using his knowledge of the desert, he created a small distraction. A rock thrown carefully to create noise away from the house. The intruders looked up, startled, and one of them ran toward the sound. The other two followed, leaving their immediate area unguarded. John seized the opportunity. He stepped forward from his hiding spot, voice firm and commanding. "Stop right there," he shouted. The intruders froze, startled by the unexpected sound. John raised his rifle but did not fire. His goal was to intimidate and protect, not to harm. The desert echoed his words, the sound carrying far and wide. "Who are you? What do you want?" John demanded. His eyes were steady, his stance confident, showing that he would not be intimidated. The intruders hesitated, unsure of what to do. They had expected an easy target, not a man prepared and determined to defend the girl. After a tense moment, the group realized that they were outmatched. John's knowledge of the terrain, his calm confidence, and the sudden appearance of resistance made them reconsider. Slowly, they backed away, leaving the ranch property. John watched until they disappeared into the darkness, disappearing like shadows swallowed by the desert. Returning inside, John checked on Lila. She was wide-eyed, but relieved. They were here?" she whispered. John nodded. "Yes, but it's over now. You're safe." Lila's shoulders relaxed slightly and she allowed herself a small smile. In that moment, a deep trust formed between them. She knew he would protect her, no matter what. The next day, John contacted the authorities again, providing details about the intruders and the tracks he had observed. The response was swift this time, and a team arrived to investigate and ensure that Lila would remain safe. John explained the situation calmly, making sure Lila was comfortable with the process. The authorities took her into protective custody, ensuring she would be placed in a secure environment while further investigations took place. Though it was difficult to say goodbye, John understood the necessity. Lila needed safety and care, and he could not provide all of it alone. He watched as she was escorted by the officers, her small hand waving briefly before she disappeared from view. The ranch felt emptier than before, but John carried with him the knowledge that he had done everything possible to save her. In the days that followed, John reflected on the events. He realized that the desert, once a place of loneliness and isolation, had become a place of courage and purpose. Saving Lila had awakened something in him, an understanding of responsibility, bravery, and the importance of human connection. The desert, with all its harshness, had shown him that life could still surprise him in the most unexpected ways. Even though Lila was no longer physically present, her influence remained. John found himself checking the fences with renewed vigilance, caring for the animals with deeper commitment, and appreciating the quiet beauty of the desert more than ever. The experience had changed him, teaching him that compassion and courage could transform not only the lives of others but also one's own. As the sun set over the desert once more, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, John stood on the porch gazing at the horizon. The vast emptiness of the desert was no longer a symbol of solitude. Instead, it represented resilience, hope, and the knowledge that even in the most unforgiving places, life could be protected, nurtured, and renewed. John knew challenges would come again. Life in the desert was never easy. But he also knew that he had the strength, the experience, and the courage to face them. And somewhere, out there, Lila would grow stronger, carrying with her the lessons of survival, trust, and the unspoken bond they had formed in the heart of the desert. Weeks passed after the night when John had faced the intruders. The desert had returned to its usual quiet rhythm, the wind moving softly over the sand and the stars shining brightly in the clear night sky. Yet the ranch felt different. John noticed it immediately. The absence of Lila left a silence that no wind or animal noise could fill. Still, there was a sense of peace knowing that she was safe. John had received updates from the authorities about Lila. She had been placed in a secure home with people who cared deeply for her. The staff spoke of her resilience, her quiet courage, and how she had started to smile again. John allowed himself a small, proud smile. Though she was no longer with him, he had played a part in saving her, and that thought brought a deep sense of fulfillment. Life at the ranch returned to the familiar routine, but John was different. The experience had changed him in ways he did not fully understand yet. The desert, which once symbolized loneliness and sorrow, now represented something new: hope. He tended the cattle with renewed energy, repaired fences with more care, and even spent longer hours watching the sunset, appreciating its beauty more than ever before. One morning, as he walked through the barn, John noticed small signs of growth, not just in the animals or the plants, but within himself. He realized that he had been living for survival alone for too many years. Now he understood that life had more to offer when shared, even if only in small ways. He smiled, remembering Lila's curiosity, her small hand brushing Dusty's mane and her wide eyes looking up at the stars. She had reminded him of the joy and innocence he thought he had lost forever. John began to make small changes around the ranch. He set up a small garden, something he had never had the patience to do before. He planted flowers and vegetables, imagining that Lila might have enjoyed helping him. The act of nurturing life, even in small ways, brought him peace. He found that the desert, with all its harshness, could also support growth, resilience, and life if one cared enough. One afternoon, John rode out to the mesquite tree where he had first found Lila. He stood there quietly, looking at the desert stretching endlessly in all directions. Memories of that day came flooding back. The fear, the surprise, the rush of responsibility, and the relief of carrying her to safety. He ran his hand along the rough bark of the tree, remembering the small, fragile body that had hung there, and he felt gratitude. Gratitude that he had been in the right place at the right time, and gratitude that Lila had survived. Though Lila was no longer at the ranch, John knew their connection would last. He thought of her often, imagining her growing stronger, learning, and smiling freely without fear. In his heart, he hoped she would remember him not only as the man who had saved her, but as someone who had shown her kindness and trust in a world that had been unkind for far too long. The desert also taught John lessons about vigilance and preparedness. He continued to monitor the surroundings carefully, understanding that the past could sometimes return unexpectedly, but now he did so with calmness rather than fear. His actions were deliberate, steady, and confident. He had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. In the evenings, John would sit on the porch, watching the sunset and the stars appear one by one. Dusty would rest nearby, and the cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. The solitude that had once felt heavy and endless now felt like a companionable silence. He thought about Lila and the small yet profound difference she had made in his life. She had reminded him that even after years of loneliness, life could still surprise him with joy, purpose, and meaning. One day, a letter arrived from Lila's new home. She had written a few lines in careful handwriting. "Dear John, thank you for saving me. I am learning to be brave every day, just like you taught me. I will never forget you or the desert where you helped me. I hope one day you can visit, and I can show you how strong I have become. With gratitude, Lila." John held the letter in his hands, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. The words, simple and honest, brought tears to his eyes. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer, knowing that her courage and gratitude were now part of his life forever. The desert had taken much from him over the years, but it had also given him something irreplaceable, a chance to save a life and, in the process, rediscover his own. Life continued at the ranch. John maintained the fences, cared for the animals, and worked the land, but there was a new energy in his actions. He repaired old equipment with renewed attention, tended to the garden he had planted, and even started to leave small gifts, like fresh fruits or flowers, at the old tree where he had found Lila. It was a quiet way to honor her presence, a reminder of the bond they had shared and the lessons she had taught him. As months passed, the ranch became more than a place of survival. It became a place of hope and renewal. John realized that the years of solitude had prepared him for this moment, for the responsibility of protecting another life. He had learned patience, resilience, and the value of quiet courage. The desert, once a symbol of loss and loneliness, now represented life, growth, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. One evening, as the sun sank below the horizon, John sat on the porch, Dusty resting at his feet. The desert stretched endlessly before him, bathed in gold and purple light. The wind whispered softly, carrying with it a sense of peace and possibility. John took a deep breath, feeling a connection to the land, to Lila, and to the life he had rebuilt. He knew that challenges might come again, but he was ready to face them, stronger and wiser than before. In the quiet desert, John had discovered more than just survival. He had discovered courage, compassion, and the enduring power of human connection. And even though Lila was far away, she remained a part of his life, A living reminder that even in the most desolate places hope could bloom, and life could flourish. The desert had taught him this truth. Even after years of solitude, even after pain and loss, life could still offer unexpected miracles. And sometimes those miracles arrived in the smallest, most fragile forms. Like a young girl who had changed everything with her courage and her trust.